Yes, welcome everybody. I'm very excited to talk to you today. And I'm also not surprised that this topic, hate speech and how to deal with it, is of key importance to you, being young startups in the media sphere. I will start my presentation. So I am part of the new German media makers, as you would translate it. We are an NGO, an organization that is independently funded, and we work with journalists from all kinds of backgrounds, but we especially want to make an impact on the way that media reports on topics like migration. And this is being done on two levels. Once on the staff level, we want to convince editors or people in charge that they hire more people with migration backgrounds. And also on a thematic level, we want to raise awareness on matters of discrimination that is done by the media itself. So we have a lot of projects, and one of our projects is the No Hate Speech movement. It's called a movement because it's not only in place in Germany, but in 40 countries all over the world. So maybe in one of your countries, there's also a movement like this. It has been initiated by the Council of Europe in 2013, where in Germany, at least no one had heard of the term hate speech. And it was only implemented here in 2016 by my organization. And since then, the level of awareness has risen a lot, as you might have noticed. And so now we are a very big project with a lot of attention and a lot of especially media, people from media come to us and ask us for advice. We are funded, maybe that's interesting for you, by different organizations, for example, also by Facebook and Twitter, but mostly by the Federal Ministry for Family Affairs. And we are only funded for a small period of time, so for 2 years. We have two websites. Afterwards, Pauline will also send you a little tip sheet that I draw out for you, where you can find all the important links also to our websites. The first website of the No Hate Speech movement, we have also translated into English, so you can find some help there. Okay. Let me first introduce you what we will be talking about today. So I heard that you are very interested in the effects that hate speech has for journalists, physical, mental, and in the working place. So I will concentrate a lot on this, but only in the second half of my talk. In the first half, we have to look at some general questions. That is, what is hate speech? Why should we counter hate speech, especially as journalists? What can we do maybe to prevent even hate speech? And then how can we counter hate speech? Okay. You can type in any questions that you have, and also interrupt my talk if you don't understand something that I said. And afterwards, we will have the discussion. So what are we talking about? I'm very sorry that while talking about hate speech, we also have to reproduce hate speech. This is what this picture is about. Because I'm very sure that you are very aware of what hate speech is for you and what problems you are facing in everyday life. But as you know it and I know it, the whole picture of hate speech and what it is not so clear. There are a lot of definitions and a lot of different legal backgrounds in different countries. So it is important to talk about what we are talking about. So maybe you can just have a look at these posts. I'm not really eager to read them out, but these are just 3 examples of hate speech regarding anti-Muslim talk, or National Socialism, or racism, also sexism, that we encounter a lot. But yeah, what is hate speech? There is some definition that we can work with. For example, the Council of Europe, who has initiated our movement, provides a definition. I will read it out for you. The term hate speech shall be understood as covering all forms of expression which spread, incite, promote, or justify racial hatred, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, or other forms of hatred based on intolerance, including intolerance expressed by aggressive nationalism and ethnocentrism, discrimination and hostility against minorities, migrants, and people of immigrant origin. We ourselves, we have a little bit of a different definition because we think that there are some problems also with the Council of Europe definition. So basically we have 4 bullet points. So first of all, hate speech is a linguistic action. This is quite self-explanatory, but often people mix it up with physical violence. We're not talking about physical violence that reporters or journalists encounter when they are reporting from demonstrations or sites of war or something like that. We are talking about linguistics. Then secondly, it is directed not only at individuals, but most importantly against groups, with the aim of devaluation or threatening these people. And fourthly, and most importantly, this is done because of their affiliation to disadvantaged groups in society. This is very important because we, as No Hate Speech movement, we are asked very often, isn't this hate speech also against, let's say, Germans or against Nazis even? Isn't there such thing as hate speech against Nazis? And we clearly state that no, this is not possible, because due to our definition, it's the disadvantaged group in societies that get targeted the most. And so the hatred that is online is a mirror of what is done in the offline world. So examples of hate speech for us, as I already mentioned, some is racism, sexism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Ziganism, fascism, but also classism, ableism, homo and transphobia. Now, so what is the problem with this? First of all, there is no internationally binding, consistent, common definition of hate speech. It is highly contested also, and it is a political term. Also, there is no legal definition, at least not in Germany. I'm not sure if that occurs to all the countries, but in Germany, there is no legal definition. There are, of course, laws that prevent people being harmed by speech, slur, showing of symbols of forbidden organizations or something like that, but it's not labeled as hate speech. And also our criminal statistics, they don't have a category, or didn't used to have a category like that. But I know it's very different in countries all around the world, and also the laws of the media is very different. So I won't talk about this today, because you won't have a lot of use to know how the German legal system works. The last problem that I want to mention is that, of course, we advise journalists, social media editors or community managers to step in even before something becomes hate speech. So actually, it's not really important that you define something as hate speech in order to take action. So maybe it's it's better to say that we are talking about some sort of disruptive behavior by your audience or your readers, or your viewers, or about excitable speech or toxic speech, and not about hate speech only. Okay, so now we've settled what we are talking about, and now we have to address the question why you should care about that at all. It takes a lot of time, it consumes a lot of your manpower or women power. Why should you bother with it? Why can it not just stay on your website, in the channels of your social media networks? Well, first of all, I'm very sure that there's also laws within your countries that make you as a medium responsible for the stuff that is on your website. It is the case in Germany. So you are responsible and you have to take care not only what you write yourself, but also what has been written by the users in the comments. Secondly, if there's a lot of hate speech in the comment section on your website or in the social media channels, some kind of toxic communication culture will develop, and people will refrain from coming to your website or coming to your social media channels. So it's actually also toxic for the loyalty of your readers or consumers. And if you have to, this is also an economic argument to use with your boss, for example, to employ more people, that eventually taking care of your community and putting some effort into a good communication culture will in the end pay off. Why engage in this discussion at all? Well, if you don't, people disengage in these discussions. For example, Amnesty International Austria conducted a survey with over 4,000 women, and they found out that 23%, so 1/4, was subject to abuse in social media. And out of these 23%, 1/3 said that they don't say their opinion anymore on special topics. So it starts a vicious circle that people refrain from talking about their topics, stating their opinions, because they are afraid of hate speech. And this is even the case considering that the haters themselves are in a minority position. There are a lot of studies being done who are the perpetrators, and they are a very little minority, like say 8%, and 1% maybe is 50% of the hatred comes from 1% of the accounts. But if you don't say something, then there will be a complete different picture of society's norms, values, taboos. And so that's why we promote to speak up and to engage in counter speech. But what we also stress is the last point, that you should not try to change the views of the person that is using hate speech. You should not try to persuade them or change their mind. You should write the counter arguments for those who are reading along, who might engage in the discussion but don't dare to do so yet. So this is really a very important aspect of moderation, content and communication moderation. So now it's time for us to look at what we can do to prevent hate speech. Unfortunately, I have to tell you, there is not a lot that you can do to prevent it. It's out there. It will happen to you. But there's some measures that you can take so that it won't hit you as hard. First of all, you can optimize your editorial workflows, meaning that everyone from top to bottom is aware of this problem and sensible towards it. Then I already mentioned it. It's also a case of recruitment and employment, because if there's no one in charge of viewing the comments or has the time to moderate, then you won't have a good communication culture. It's not possible. there should be some regular meetings to talk about. There should be the possibility for people to inform themselves on this topic. There should be legal aid. There should be psychological, not schooling, but the possibility for people to engage in psychological counseling. I know that you are all startups and that you have very little resources. So you have to just maybe have that in mind, that will be the optimum, but adjust that to your financial needs, of course. But there's also things that you can do that don't cost a lot of money. And that is, for example, to have some sort of list where you put down the most common hate arguments and possible answers for it and make that available to everyone. Or to have sort of a community standards written out that you can refer to when you, for example, block people or when you ask them to behave more nicely. Also, what you can do is take a good look at how your private settings are secured. Is it possible that someone can see your telephone number, especially important for freelance journalists? Maybe there's the possibility in your country to block your personal data for other people so that they can't get that information. And yeah, you have to be very careful with passwords, with private settings on your private social media channels as well. And yeah, then there's also some very important issue on my organization is that a lot of media organizations, they write very careful article, very not biased and very balanced, but then when they put it on social media, they try to make better headlines so that there's more clicks on their websites, which are not balanced anymore, and they use certain pictures that will agitate the reader and stir up hate speech. So you have to be very thoughtful of what you use as words and also with illustration of your articles on social media, and maybe not post every article that you produce there, because you know that it will stir up a lot of hate and you won't be able to manage it afterwards. And lastly, there's more and more medias, they use technical solutions to block out hatred. They have algorithms that predict when some comments might or might not be hate speech. If you only use these technical solutions, it will be seen as censorship by your readers, by your users. So we advise media use technical solution. It will help you reduce this problem of too little staff, but don't use it only. You have to be prepared for human interference in this discourse. Make active use of counter speech. Okay. How to counter? So there's 10 bullet points that I would like to point out. Of course, you can counter with humor. This is creating a lot of attention, many likes. It will show in the very top level of the comments if you answer with humor, with gifs or memes or arguments. But also humor is very sensible. So maybe some people think that it's not funny. So secondly, you can use arguments, of course, but that will take a lot of time. But then there is some points that you can always take in mind, and these I will come to now. So you have to respond as soon as possible. There's no use in responding after 2 days. You should, as I said, address the other commentators, not the ones spreading the hate. Remain respectful, because otherwise you will just stir up this whole discussion, and keep your arguments short. If you want to, and if you have, refer to the community standards, and also the community themselves will refer to them and help you do your work. Don't exchange more than 4 arguments, because after that you will know that someone is not really interested in a discussion. Thank your community if they step up for you. Answer to constructive and factual comments first, because also then they will be shown in the timeline in the top level. And when there's actual hate speech, don't hesitate to delete or report the comments, mute or block the users. And don't respond with the same phrase, because that is very lame, not only for the haters, but especially for the people who really want to engage in a discussion. Let me just tell you a little bit more about the blocking. As I just said, it's there's one example where there's the extreme, where there are threats to kill someone, to rape or to maim. But you can even block people before that. For example, if they target the writer of the article. I have an example from The Guardian here, where they blocked someone. A female journalist reports on a demonstration outside an abortion clinic, and a reader responds, "You're so ugly that if you got pregnant, I would drive you to the abortion clinic myself." So there is no need at all to let this stay on your website. You can just block it. The same goes with call yourself a journalist, or even more calm down, dear, or yeah, as I just said, the obvious examples of hate speech you have to block anyway. So I don't know if you are tired yet about me talking, so I thought we play a little game. I hope it works with the chat here. You have to engage in your chat now. So I will read out 3 comments, and you tell me if you, as a moderator, would block that and why you would do it, or if you would let it stay there because you think that's a good contribution. So the first example is a piece about what makes one a feminazi. So the comment goes, "Funny how so many journalists are female and how many are feminists. A disproportionate number pollutes journalism. Just shows that men do tend to do harder jobs than keyboard bashing, while the technology that men designed and built is used to provide these harpies with a medium from which to spout their biased, sexist, hateful misandry." So I'm very curious if this works technically, if you could tell me in the chat whether you would block that comment or not. Oh, nothing's coming up. Nothing's coming up.
Short remark, Ellen. I got the impression that there is something wrong with the chat window.
Oh, okay.
As colleagues of mine told me that they cannot see other attendances, and I'm not sure if they can write their questions anyway in the chat window. So
we'll just skip this.
Yeah, let's try that.
Okay, back to the presentation. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I had just learned that you won't be able to play this little game with me. So I will just tell you what The Guardian did. So The Guardian blocked this article because they said it's containing hate speech, being sexist, and there is no contribution to the debate. So I will just shortly shorten this little play I invented with reading out another example where they didn't block. So it's a fashion piece. And the comment goes, so blue jeans are finally back. This might be shocking for sheltered London-centric Guardian types, but out in the real world, people have been wearing blue jeans quite happily for years. So they didn't block this comment because even though there might be a kick towards London-centric Guardian types, it's not hate speech because this group is not considered as being disadvantaged in the society. And also, this is just one opinion of the many and doesn't hurt anyone. So now you were interested in what the effects of hate speech on journalism and journalists are. So the good news is there have been some studies on that, starting only in 2016. So that's a very relatively new phenomenon that is investigated in, but there are some studies. So one in 2016 was done with Swedish journalists, and it found out that 68% felt hurt after receiving abusive comments. 49% were fearful of the threats they received. 37% worried about these comments, and 9% even considered quitting their jobs. As I mentioned already sometime, The Guardian, he was very thoughtful about this whole hate speech development, and he did an investigation with the own staff and found out that 10 of the most abused writers, out of the 10 most abused writers, 8 were women and 2 were men, and these 2 men were black. So here you can see again that hate speech is not spread evenly across the society, and also the victims of hate speech are not random, but they are exactly those people who are disadvantaged in society themselves already. The 10 regular writers who got the least abused were men, and 2% of all the comments were blocked due to their violation of community standards. And also there were like very common topics that you could rule out there where there was a lot of hate speech. So fashion was not one of them, but world news, opinion, and environment. We also found that sports is such a section where there's a lot of disruptive behavior. And I want to read out something that a Guardian writer, a woman, told the investigators. She said, receiving hate speech is like, imagine going to work every day and walking through a gauntlet of 100 people saying, you're stupid, you're terrible, you suck, I can't believe you get paid for this. It's a terrible way to go to work. Also in Germany, there was done a little survey in 2017, which was done by a partner organization actually of ours. And they found out that 1/3 of the journalists reported that there is no support whatsoever in their organization or in the media to offer them assistance. And not even 1/4 have legal assistance. Only 9% were offered trainings. Only 5% exchanged views with colleagues. And only 3% had confidential meetings. And this had some effects on their lives also. So 1/3 said that their hate they received impaired their private lives, that it had negative effects on their physical well-being, that was 16%, on their psychological well-being, that was more than half, and 23% said that it had consequences for their work. Now, the hate speech movement is just now starting to have a partnership with the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma. I don't know if you know this organization. It was started for war reporters and actually dealt with trauma in the war zones that journalists received. And now they extended their knowledge and their work shops for journalists that received hate speech, because they said that it's very similar, traumatizing than going to a field of war. So now I will tell you what they found, what the consequences of hate speech are. So first of all, they also say the most you will notice will be the psychological consequences, like anger and hostility, lowered self-esteem, humiliation, self-blame, relationship distress, depression, anxiety, substance abuse. And as I said, it's the same symptoms as post-traumatic stress. It's no difference if that happens offline or online. Then there are physical consequences, like headaches, for example, like sleep disturbances, like pain, like weight loss. And this is also something that I can confirm. We are doing seminars ourselves for community manager and social media editors. And this is one thing that they want to talk about a lot, besides being having the feeling of being alone with regarding to laws or protection from the state. They say it's all good and well, but after, how can I stop that I go home and feel like I have swam in a pile of shit? It has a lot of consequences for the work relations also, and it's probably it's probably related to the fact that there's a lot of young people in these community managing positions, and they change a lot. They drop out and are hired again. And so a lot of knowledge is lost, a lot of support structures are lost. But if you don't look after them very well, then it's also very frustrating work. And it leads to the fact that there's not very much satisfaction from the work. You're not committed to this organization or to your work, and you start withdrawing. So we have talked a lot about these all bad implications, but now I would like to give you some small hints of how you can still cope and how you can still look after yourself. First of all, the human mind is very much eager to focus on negative thoughts and spirals. So we would suggest that you also try to think positive and think about why you are doing this work, for whom you are doing it, and not so much thinking about the hater, not maybe looking, save your space in time or in a day where you don't look at your social media channels, so that you have this air to breathe. Then be prepared before dealing with hate speech, meaning you should be very aware. There's this term mindfulness of that what you're doing. Maybe when you open your laptop, you can tell yourself, now I'm reading this hate speech, I'm dealing with it, this is why I'm doing it. I can feel myself breathing. I can feel it feels bad to see this, but it will be a different way to deal with it. Instead of being flashed like a wave, you are prepared to see this and to read this. It might also help you to analyze your haters. You can even ask data analysts to analyze a shitstorm, for example. We did this in Germany, and this will maybe help you to see it's not the majority of people, it's very small amount of people. It's a coordinated attack. It's not that all of a sudden the world thinks that you're a shitty journalist. And you can also start categorizing hate speech maybe into a scale of from 1 to 10 in not so bad to very bad and toxic. And the best advice is to activate your social network, to talk with colleagues, to talk with friends, families, and maybe let them do a big proportion of the work, scanning your hate mails, scanning your accounts, if you are targeted as a journalist. Then there's also advice what the bosses can do. First of all, it's this feeling of solidarity and empowerment that you need to create in your environment of your organization, that you understand the severeness of the situation, that you understand the impact that hate speech can have, and not try to talk it down or narrow it down. Ask your employee what you can do to help. Make sure that your comment moderation works properly. Raise awareness within your organization. This is including staff trainings, preparing guidelines that everyone can use, and don't refrain from getting external help. Make a safety assessment. Maybe you can also write down lists of psychological support that is available for you or your freelance workers. This is also very important. A lot of organizations leave out the freelancers. And tell the employees that they have done nothing wrong. Okay, there's a question popping up. I don't know if you can read it all, so maybe I will read it out for you. My question would be how media organizations can respond to death threats towards its journalists. What kind of action can be taken? Well, death threats is like a very extreme example of hate speech, and it doesn't happen very often, but it happens. And it's especially scary for freelance journalists because they feel they don't even have an organization with that will back their that will cover their backs. I can tell you how it's done in Germany. If you receive a death threat, you have a talk with the police and they will counsel you on what to do. But as I now heard also, it's a little bit of a laughable joke what they tell you. They say, take a torch with you when you go outside in the dark, report everything that is strange, so it doesn't really help. Then there's the question of, do you want to have bodyguards, which some people want to, others don't, because it's even more attention and because they feel even more disabled to lead their lives as they want to. But also there's maybe the need for journalists to move flats, maybe temporarily, maybe forever. So there's something where the employee can help, I think. It's very, very practical points, like, hiring someone who does the move, who helps you move, or looking for an apartment. The people have to do that in their free time where they want to write. And also it's about the money. So maybe you should have a little fund as a media organization that where you can put money in that can be used in these extreme circumstances when someone has to move flats or someone has to contact a lawyer because maybe they are not covered by the legal department because they are freelancers. And that could cover the costs. And also one point is that there are, even if there is a legal department, a lot of the lawyers advise not to go forward and charge the hater because it's very seldomly successful, and that you should allow the journalists to choose their own lawyer so that they can press charges against these threats. Yeah, but it's very, very, I could talk forever about it. So it has a lot to do with money, but also with the feeling of solidarity and the feeling of responsibility that the person is being subject to death threats because of their work for you. And I think that not a lot of employees and bosses bear that in mind. Have I answered your question? yeah, I don't get feedback. I hope I have answered your question, Lika. Okay, so I will just finish up. So for colleagues, we have also some advices. You can also ask if the colleague needs help, or if you want to moderate their social media accounts. So if it doesn't affect you, then it's not so bad maybe. You can save illegal content and later on discuss with your colleague if you maybe want to press charges, or report comments that have broken the social media's own rules. You can always do that and be good company. And the end of my talk, I just wanted to be a little bit more funny. So I will just show you one example of how to deal with hate speech is talk about it. So here I have an example where someone reported the rape threats that she got to the mother. So you can also stalk your haters, find out their relatives, and also tell them about what their spouses are doing. So that's what it. Thank you very much. And I'm very much looking forward for the discussion.
Thank you, Ellen. Unfortunately, there were many of the colleagues who did not have access to the chat room, obviously. Mm-hmm. What is a little bit of disadvantage for a webinar? But anyway, I asked them if they have questions, they can write them via email to me, and this is how Lika did it. So she wrote me her question and I wrote it into the chat window. But of course, I did prepare some questions. So we will go through them, and perhaps some of the media startups will write me their questions via email so I can read them out. We will hopefully solve these technical problems until the next webinar in October. But as this is our first session, of course, it was clear that there will be some technical problems anyway on one side. So here it's on the participant side. I would like to talk with you, first of all, about the development in the previous 3-4 years. You mentioned that the threats and hate speech directed towards journalists increased in the past few years. Do you know any reasons for that?
Well, first of all, if we talk about numbers, we have to say in the beginning that we are talking about the perceived numbers, or the how people perceive a hate speech, because we don't have a common definition. The data is not collected by the state or by the legal system. So we can only do surveys and ask the people if they are, if they think that hate speech increased, and when they say yes, then that would mean there is that doesn't mean hate speech increased, but there's an increased level of awareness on hate speech. Mm-hmm. So so this is something that you have to bear in mind when dealing with figures. So one thing is, I would like to point out that there is a lot of work being done on this whole hate speech thing, and that a lot of people try to be aware of it. So this is one point why it is a lot of more, why the numbers increased. But another thing, I can only talk for Germany, is that there's a perceived divide of society between a lot of topics, and that people disengaged in a civil matter to discuss things. So this is a general phenomenon that is not special for journalists. But the journalists, they provide they provide web space where there's a very broad possibility for people to engage in discussions. And so they do. If they want to make themselves being heard with their position, then they don't do it in little forums that they create for themselves, but they go to the biggest news website and try to spread their views there.
And at the same time, journalists are more visible than normal citizens, right?
The journalists themselves are more visible, but also the website is more visible. And then there has been like this open time space where there was not a lot of moderation going on. So the media, they knew, okay, we have to put everything that we do on Facebook and Twitter, no matter what. We have to be active there. We have to create clicks. But they didn't really think about making a social media plan like every other organization does in normal ways. And so they created a situation where they provided a lot of input and produced a lot of comments, but were not able to follow up what they started. And sometimes also not really feeling responsible, but most of the time I think being not prepared to hire so much staff. But it's when you compare the media where it in Germany, where it's kind of a very civilized discussion and where it's not a civilized discussion, it's maybe only a matter of 5 to 7 people that are hired to moderate discussions, and it will be the best place in the world to exchange the views. But these are the 5 to 7 people that the media organizations are not willing to or are not able to, because readership is declining and so on, you know the problem, to hire and to look after these comments. So what we are advising is to say you don't have to put everything on Facebook if you cannot manage it. Just put that what you can manage, or in your readers section in the website themselves. You can also block certain sections for comments. So a lot of media organizations do that in Germany. They say, sorry, this comment section is not open to topics that concern migration, rape, suicide, because we just can't handle the fact that there's so much hate speech. And yeah, I think it's a lot of people restrain from doing that because they think that there might be called censors or something. But I think it's better to close the discussion or not even open it than to have hate speech online and not dealing with it.
And what about this strategy that the author of a story discuss perhaps for about 2 or 3 hours with the community and not only the social media editor?
Yeah, this is also a problem because it concerns the working flows. So, for example, if you're a very small media organization and you tell the author within your 8 hours of work or 10 hours of work, you have to do now 2 hours of social media moderation or content moderation, then actually that will be not an improvement for his or her working environment, but even be more stressful. On the other hand, the social media editors, or the community manager might not be so familiar with the topic and have to talk with the author anyway. And so there will be a lot of work that has to be done double if they don't engage directly, the authors. But also there are journalists who don't want to engage in social media, and I think it should be the task of the boss to say, if you don't want to engage, you don't have to. We have people that do it for you. But on the other side, if you want to engage, I have to guarantee you free time where you do this, and not have that as an extra load on top of everything that you already have to do.
Some people say it's best just not to react or to respond to hater and trolls and their comments. So you do not give them additional attention and also platform for spreading their views. Would you classify this as a good strategy?
Well, it depends. In general, I would say ignoring is not an option with hate speech, especially with hate speech. Also, you should at least report it to the social network, because it violates the community standard of Facebook or Twitter. But you don't have to engage in counter speech with every hater or every troll, because then you might give them more media attention that they would get. So what we do with the No Hate Speech project, we just we divide between the different channels. For example, with Facebook, we try to answer every discriminatory post, but with Twitter, we make a divide between people who have, I think, 500 followers. Under this, we don't answer them. We just don't want to give them the attention. But if they are more prominent, we will answer them. So maybe you can have a solution that is a little bit differentiated between the channels and also the profiles of the perpetrators.
What would you say is the main channel for hate speech? Is it Facebook or Twitter or Instagram?
The main what?
The main channel.
The main channel. I cannot really say that in general, especially not worldwide. I can just say from our point of view, for our project, it's YouTube.
Okay.
We sometimes post videos ourselves, and it's very, very hard to keep up and to read all the negative comments. They are way the majority of all the comments. And with Facebook, luckily, there's a lot of organizations who also try to engage in a discourse where they organize themselves. I don't know, they have it in Germany called Ich bin hier, and I think it's from Sweden. Maybe there's other organizations in other countries that have it. So they read the biggest news channels. And then if they find out that there's a discussion developing and the community moderators or the social media editors, they don't respond adequately, they will engage in a discussion and call for the other members of the group to also do this. And then there is a discussion developing that actually improves the communication culture in Facebook. So, and with Twitter, it's a kind of bizarre situation, because Twitter is the main channel for journalists and also politicians, as you know, to announce and to engage in exchanging views. But Twitter itself is very little, and a lot of people, not very many people of the general population in percentage use Twitter. So they don't really engage in counter speech on Twitter. So there's a lot of, there's quite some different strategies that you have to use on Twitter. Not so much counter speech, but maybe also block or reward your community or post positive things, rather than engage in a very broad discussion as you can do it on Facebook.
But perhaps it can be said that, for example, Instagram is a channel where hate speech is not that present, right?
No, unfortunately not.
Because people are there friendly with each other.
It's only pictures.
Okay.
No, it's not. No, there's also hate speech.
Okay,
there.
I see. you were talking about the effects, for example, physical effects of hate speech. You talked about post-traumatic stress. But there's also this phenomena that has been mentioned in your book. In your book, it's called Waterproofed, through the Shitstorm in German. Mm-hmm. Is it also available in English?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay, only in German. It has been published in 2017. I have another question later on that. But in this book, you mentioned, for example, there's also this effect of that journalists have some kind of scissor in their head, Schere im Kopf. Mm-hmm. So perhaps we can also say self-censorship or something. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
Well, this is one of the outcomes of the survey done with our partner organizations, that they said that the journalists start to think that they can't really engage in reporting about the topic that they're reporting on, because they are fearing for their lives or the well-being of their family. And this is also something that we found out by our research while talking with journalists, that they said when they received a shitstorm, they are fearful of reporting on this topic again. I mean, I don't have numbers of how many people actually drop out on the job or refrain from talking about the topic altogether. I think that a lot of people stand up to the challenge and deal with the threats and still report on what's important to them. But I think that's a very big threat to the democracy, that the people that should report on circumstances, that they refrain from doing it out of fear.
Yeah, and we at DW Academy, I think that mental health is really important also for media viability, and that media startups can stay alive on the long run. And you mentioned some strategies how to care for oneself. What is the most important thing? What do you think?
Well,
caring for oneself.
First of all, also I want to say something before I answer this question, because in our experience, a lot of people that are not subject of hate speech always ask people that are victims, how are you feeling? How are you coping? Can you still be alive? How do you do all of this? We want to talk about it. And this emotional side is not the biggest problem of people who actually deal with hate speech. They have maybe they have also emotional problems, but I think what is mostly wearing them down is that they don't have support from their employees, that they don't feel they don't have support from the legal system. The haters are not punished. They don't, and they are handicapped in their daily life, even though they were the victims. They are losing money if they report the claims. They are losing their houses. They are losing their security. And so what they want to do is taking political action, doing lobbying, asking to come together to organize forms of protest and support. But also, I think, so answering the question is the psychological implications are very often sidelined and not looked up on correctly. And I think that it's also very difficult for the for the employees for the bosses to do something, because health and even more mental health is also a very private issue, and you have to do certain things for the insurances and so on and so on. But what I heard was that that media organizations in Germany, they just hired psychological experts to talk about the consequences as a prevention method. So they don't come in need when it's actually the problem is so big that someone drops out, but they come to prevent this from happening. And I think that is something that every organization can do. And also what we already heard was that some employees, they just did some research on where there are psychological experts that can deal with post-traumatic syndrome, especially maybe from online hatred, and write it down as a sort of a list, as a service for their colleagues or employees that they themselves can contact, for example. So these are 2 examples.
And what is the main mistake what journalists do in terms of mental health? That they ignore some post-traumatic syndromes, or what would you say is the main mistake?
Well, first of all, I had to say that I'm not an expert in this. Everything that I know in this regard is because of our partner, the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma. But I think that one of the mistakes is the isolation that takes place, that people think they are alone with this problem, and maybe it's their fault, or they just have to do better coping mechanism, and they don't, and then they sort of start dropping out, and others come in starting dropping out, and so this problem is never really addressed properly. But also, on the other hand, I think bad psychological advice is also a very big problem. So, for example, people saying, oh, you just have to think that it's not society as a whole, but just one hater. That doesn't really help if you are in the middle of a shitstorm, or if someone says you should put down your smartphone for a little while, and the job or even the life of that person exists in being online, then this is not very much of a help either. So first of all, I think it's very important to just ask, as I said, what the people want, what they need, and try to support them, and not throwing around advice that you think yourself will help.
Yeah, and one of your suggested strategies is also to make your Facebook account private. For journalists who would like to, address as many people as possible, this is probably not the best solution. What do you think?
No, I mean, you can develop maybe 2 accounts, or maybe you can just put it on private for a little while, like for 2 or 3 days, because shitstorms, they feel like forever, but they're actually very seldom for more than 3 days, for example. I also heard a very funny example of a professor in Germany who deals with sexism a lot. She invented an email address saying hate post at, and then her name, and then actually people send the hate post to that address. Funny enough. So maybe there are some of these technical solutions that you can use for yourself. But yeah, this is one of bad advice, saying for someone who makes it as a living, just go away from social media if you can't.
Yeah. And I mentioned you published your book in 2017, and you're about to prepare a new edition with additional chapters. So what will be new in this new edition? So what chapters are additional right now?
Yeah, well, I'm very sorry that it's not available in English. Maybe this is something that we can think of in the new period of our project, because in the beginning we also translated our website. But in the new book, we just pay a little bit more attention on this mental health issue. We have an article written by the Dart Center, who, by the way, have also very practical tip sheets. You will later see in the link list I sent you. This is one. Then we will have more focus on the wording and framing of stories. So the question on how we can prevent hate speech being stirred up by our own articles. And then we have a very new initiative of Germany where they say it's called Verfolgen statt nur löschen, meaning it's not only enough that we report hate speech to social media platforms that they are deleted, because then no one can see it anymore. It's just as if it didn't happen, and the perpetrators are still not being tackled or being taken responsible. So what they do is the state's attorney puts charges so that the victim doesn't have to pay for lawyers, and they work together, the police, the lawyers, the media. They report hate speech to the state's attorney, and they press charges. And it's like a model for Germany, and it should be done in all the federal states, but in the moment it's only in one of them. So this can be an example where media can cooperate with other institutions so that the haters are held responsible for what they do.
Mm-hmm. You gave a lot of workshops in terms of hate speech, also towards media organizations in Germany. Would you like to share your key learnings in the past 3 years in terms of hate speech?
So we are doing these workshops for journalists. We're doing for 2 years now. Mm-hmm. The first year we addressed more the youth or activists in the internet. So it changes in a very rapid phase. So it's also a lot that I think maybe it's not so much about telling people what to do, but creating a space where they can meet and share experience. This is something that I found out a lot of times, that they are very grateful for just the time they had to discuss things and to meet and talk with other people from other media platforms, how they deal with something. So that's maybe something that we neglect, that it's not so much about knowledge being missing, but about space for exchange and solidarity. So that's one thing. And another thing that maybe I would like to point out is what I already said in my talk. A lot of media organizations, they have started technical solutions for this hate problem, and they're not very transparent about it because they fear the censorship argument. But actually, I think that's kind of a dangerous development if technical instruments define what hate speech is and what not, and delete it. And that I would like to suggest that there is human resources put into that debate. But it's often a matter of money, a matter of priorities. But I think the development is that algorithms determine how we talk to each other.
Yeah, I would like to add there's also a format called hate poetry. It was founded by journalists with migration background in Germany, and there are some journalists who are on the stage and read out the comments that they are getting because of their migration background. What is really awful to hear, to be honest. but for them it's some kind of, like a cleaning process, that they are not isolated and alone with these comments, but they can just put them out in the universe and share that with others. And you're laughing all the time, but it's like, really,
Liberation.
yeah, some special sort of laughing. And at the same time you're thinking about, of course, this comments, and that there should be some kind of solidarity also with these journalists. So I think this is a clever method to react on that, not being alone with it, but to share it with many other people and to let them know that they are getting this.
Yeah, that's exactly the last point of my presentation, talk about it. And this will be of help because, sorry, it will lead out of this feeling of isolation and helplessness. And this format you're talking about is actually also something that we, as No Hate Speech movement, we developed a little bit by ourselves. And there's a lot of other formats like Shit Bingo, I don't know if you have heard it, where you can say, yeah, I got that too, you cross it out. So yeah, that is fun.
That might be of help. Okay, I will have a look at my emails, and there are no other questions that the colleagues did send to me. We are almost through with our time, and my very last question, Ellen, would be, how does the vision for the hate movement look like?
How does what? Sorry?
The vision. So like until the end of the year or until next year. So what are the next steps, or in which direction do you go with this movement right now?
Well, we are only funded for the end of this year. Actually hoping to get a refund for the next 3 years. And there are several things that we would like to focus on. First of all, we would also like to implement webinars, because we found that a lot of journalists can't afford to go physically to the trainings that are somewhere else. Even, for example, very small media organizations or those who are working on a very local level, even though they are the ones that receive the most threats, because they know the people they are living with and they meet them every day. So we hope that these webinars will get a very broad audience and acceptance. And then we would like to address the media organizations from the top to the bottom. We just what we did the last 2 years was a bottom-up approach, like telling the poor people who have to deal with social media and hate speech what to do. And now we would like to more address the questions of hiring staff and providing guidelines how to deal with hate speech, providing legal aid, what to do with the ones that are responsible. So doing a little bit of lobbying there, political lobbying also. And a very new part that we will investigate, and that we are maybe also very good organization to do, is investigate hate speech within migration communities, because it's not only hate speech against people of color, but also, of course, within migrant communities there is hate speech against each other, and it's very difficult to find out about it, because we don't speak all the languages in the world, and also to address it, because we don't want to play into the hands of ultra right-wing people. But we find it that this is a problem that we have to address. So this will be a big part of our project in the future. Oh, and lastly, I forgot, we will have a blog which will do some critique of the media, where they use framing, wording, pictures that are biased. yeah, this is something we haven't done yet.
Okay. You mentioned the link list. I'm not sure if we can share it right now, but I uploaded it, and perhaps you can see it right now.
Yeah, so I can just tell you, I included the studies that I mentioned, the one from The Guardian and the one from Amnesty Austria. Then the tip sheets from the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma. Then there are help desks, actually, one in English from the Reporters Without Borders. That's the first one. And the second one's from ours, but it's only in German, where you can find help in case of shitstorm or hate speech. Then there's articles, but I also, maybe that's also important or interesting for you, there is online training modules where you can simulate a shitstorm or simulate hate speech, like the little game I wanted to play with you, block or don't block, where you get examples and yeah, you are being advised on how to handle a certain simulated situation.
Good. So you can also see when you go to the event board on the right-hand side of your screen, there you can also download the list as PDF, but we will also send it to you via email, so you will have it nevertheless. Good. I think that's it. We are through. This were 90 minutes about hate speech and mental health. Thank you very much, Ellen, for the interesting input. Unfortunately, our participants couldn't tell or ask you questions. I would suggest if they do have special questions, they can also write you an email, perhaps, afterwards.
Yeah, very happy to answer.
Yeah, and yeah, we will solve these technical problems hopefully until the next webinar that will take place in October about metrics and key performance indicators, which are also very important for a successful media startup. And in November, the topic will be discussed with our media entrepreneurs. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your interest, and hope to see you soon, and goodbye.
Goodbye.